Today's episode is sponsored by Little Bird, the independent diamond and engagement ring consultants. The best way to buy an engagement ring is with a bird's eye view. You can find them at littlebirdtoldyou.com. I'm Eric Newton, and this is The Together Show. We all know relationships take work, but what is that work, and how do we do it? As a former divorce lawyer, I've watched thousands of couples break up firsthand. Having seen the worst in relationships, I decided to try to help couples stay together. So on this show, we talk to real couples and find out what love really looks like.
I think it's actually really good and really healthy for everyone to sort of think about like what gendered expectations have been put on you your whole life.
Welcome to the show, everyone. Thanks for listening. Today's episode is about being transgender. Last week, we took a first look at the issue of traditional and non-traditional gender roles. And this week, we expand the exploration of gender to look at identity. Our guests today, Jamie, Doe, and Bree, are all transgender. Jamie is a transgender man, Bree is a transgender woman, and Doe is a non-binary gender fluid person. Now, these three are also in a polyamorous relationship, but that's not the focus of this episode. If you'd like to hear about their romantic relationship, we'll be posting that portion of the interview for Patreon subscribers, and you can find it on our Patreon page at patreon.com/together. Now, I have to say, this was one of the most fun interviews I've done in a long time. I love all my guests, as you know, but these three in particular are so lovable that I find myself wanting to hug them every time I hear the interview. And they're so on the cutting edge of being transparent and self-aware that it's exhilarating just to be around them. I think you're really going to love these three. So with that, let's go to our interview with Jamie, Bree, and Doe. Well, welcome. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having us.
I really appreciate that. I've tripped over that one a few times since you have all arrived here today. Let's do it one more time. So everybody, let's do our pronouns. And
Sure, yeah. So I'm Doe, and I use they, them pronouns.
Okay.
I'm Brielle, and I use these or she, her pronouns.
Okay.
This is Jamie. I use he, him.
Okay.
And you?
And I'm Eric, and I use he, him.
Cool.
So let's explore the question of gender a little bit.
What is gender?
Yeah, what is what? Really, I was facilitating a talk at a tech institution recently, and that was the topic of my facilitation. What is gender?
Oh no,
that's pretty ambitious.
Well, people really enjoyed it. People were willing to dive in. We were looking at how people build apps. You know, who are you building an app towards? And I was saying, and I was using that as a way to look at gender. But nobody knows the answer, right? I mean, we have always assumed that it's binary, right? As a culture, we've always assumed that it's binary. So with that as a starting point, I'm not going to say whether it is or isn't binary. How does gender manifest for the three of you?
Well, can I start off by saying like you're talking about like the social gender thing. So like just to touch base really quick, right? Like the assumed gender is that you're born, somebody looks at your genitals and then decides like you're a boy and you're a girl. And that's called like being cisgender. That's not called that. That's called being coercively assigned to gender at birth. Queer communities have a lot of terminology for a lot of things. So, right. And then you grow up and like girls like pink and boys like trucks. And like so just to touch base about that. And then what we're doing is not that. If anybody else wants to cut in.
Well,
literally anything else.
Let me back up. And there's this term that people are using a lot lately, cisgender, which I don't think most people know what that is. So can you define that?
Yeah, sure. So cisgender is like if you've grown up in that model, right? Like let's say you grew up and you were told you were a girl and you were given like Barbie dolls and makeup and you were told that you were bad at... No, I shouldn't say what it is. But you're raised as a girl and that works for you. You grow up, you like it. Like whether you're a lesbian girl or a straight girl, you're like, being a girl is fine. And if you grow up being a boy and you're told you're a boy and all of that feels right to you and it just kind of clicks. And I think sometimes most people who are cisgender don't know the word cisgender because it means that you identify with that. Like, it's not an issue for you, whether you're gay or straight. You're like, I like this. This works for me. I like being a boy. I like being a girl. And you don't really look at it further than that.
Right. Yeah. Right. And where does the word come from?
Cis means on the same side of, as trans means on the opposite side of.
Got it. Okay.
There are also chemistry prefixes for, like, if you have a double bond and say two side groups if they're on the same side. No, I'm just gesturing with my hands on the radio, on the internet radio. But like you can have cis bonds and trans bonds, referring to like whether things are on the same side or on the other side. So cisgender was actually basically, so transgender is the older word, meaning that you have crossed gender or are not on the same team you were assigned to or whatever. And then cisgender was basically coined by trans people on the internet in like the 90s as a sort of like value neutral word to mean not trans.
Right, not normal people and trans people, but cis people and trans people.
Yes, because if you say normal, right, it's a whole can of dismissive and kind of pejorative worms.
Right.
That why open?
Or so you don't wind up saying like trans women and women,
Right.
You can say trans women and cis women, trans men and cis men.
Right. Right. Okay.
So cisgender basically just sort of exists to mark the category of not trans. And there's actually there's sort of a great thing. There's an essay from the 80s that I love about that I can never find a copy of, but it was Patrick Leafia talking about how straight people had woken up one day and they were all really and were alarmed to discover that they were all suddenly heterosexuals. And we're like, what is a heterosexual? I've never heard of a heterosexual. I can't possibly be a heterosexual. And then over time, we've kind of come to accept that like heterosexual is a word that was sort of coined to mean like not homosexual, straight, whatever. It's not, and like it's meant to be a sort of like value neutral, almost kind of clinical term, and that cisgender is that it's a very similar thing where people hear it and they're like, wait, what does that mean? Is that me?
Yeah.
How can that be me when I don't know what it is? And it's
Is
like
something bad?
No, it's not something bad. It's something that a lot of people are, and that's fine.
Yeah.
Even if you're not like super duper into your gender, if you're like, yeah, this is like I wouldn't really want to change it, then it's like, cool, you can be cis. That's cool.
Right,
hey, that's fine.
Okay, got it. Okay, and then just to be clear about it, you can be cisgendered, gay, or straight.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Because gender
those
and
separate-
sexuality are separate.
Are separate issues.
Sexuality is like who you're attracted to. Gender is how you feel about yourself. Right. So you can be a trans woman, like you can transition to being a woman, right? Like you're not a cisgender woman, you're a transgender woman who is straight or gay as well.
Right.
Like that has nothing. It's not like, oh, I need to transition so that I can date X. Like that's not the point.
And for people who are unfamiliar with saying trans woman or trans man, these are terms that are really uncommon for a lot of the listeners to our show, I think. Just to be clear, if you're saying you're a transgendered woman, you're a woman.
Yeah.
Right? Like just kind of full stop right there.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Jamie is gesturing at me on the radio.
Yeah. Both of these guys
I
are
was giving you the
gesturing
floor
at
to speak.
Yeah, I guess as the person who is a trans woman here tonight, I guess I should speak to that.
Right.
Yeah. And so the mnemonic to remember is that trans women are women,
Right.
and therefore identify as women the same way that cisgender women identify as women.
Right.
It's much easier that way. And occasionally you see like older texts and whatnot, talking about that will actually invert the terminology and will say, transgender men who take estrogen and, undergo vaginoplasty or whatever. And it's like, no, that
They're missing the point.
you're missing the
Thoroughly
point.
missing the point.
Right.
So yeah, there is some there are people who get it wrong, even in kind of official looking things, but it's certainly a lot easier if you're just like trans women means women who are trans.
And trans men means
men who are trans. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is me. So
which is you. Oh,
yeah, which is me. So
Okay.
And then also there's people who are not men or women like me.
Right. That was going to be my next question because we have the perfect. We really have the perfect. What's the word? Sample set here.
Yeah.
Right?
We got all three kinds.
we are
All four kinds.
Four kinds.
I
we have a cis
represent
person.
all non-binary genders.
yes. we have a sample pack of humans here.
I'm like the bonus magenta Sharpie.
So,
Ooh.
and I think people have started to hear about trans men and trans women, but not hearing a lot about gender neutrality.
Sure. So there's people who are men and there's people who are women, whether they're cis or trans on either end. And then there's people who don't really feel comfortable in either of those roles. And it took me a long time to come to a place where I identified. I identify as gender fluid. There's a few non-binary gender terms, but it's theoretically infinite. people will say there are people who are agender, there are people who are gender queer, there are people who are gender fluid. So I identify as gender fluid, and it took me a while to get to that place because it wasn't something I was really seeing somewhere else, but being like acting or being or living as like a woman or a man never really felt totally comfortable to me. And sometimes I get this feeling, like this insecurity that I'm not trans enough. But I hang out with other trans people and I say that and they kind of laugh at me and they're like, no, you are. So I'm like, okay, cool.
Well, it does raise this question of belonging. You know, we all want to belong, and then you start fitting yourself into a group, and then, you know, the beauty of what I think that kind of the envelope pushing that's going on around gender right now that's so inspiring to me is that it's having people explore what they want out of life, who they are. It's causing more self-inquiry in the world, not just in the trans or gender questioning or gender exploring community, but in the world. But then you get into a community where you're trying to fit in and you start finding yourself boxing yourself in. Is that a phenomenon? Is that a phenomenon that you bump up against?
So, for me, it's actually been really relieving to run into that in a way. So being trans and having been like some kind of out queer since I was 12 or 13, it's always been really hard finding a group of people that I feel okay around. And like, I've never felt like I had like a clique, which is like kind of an important part of growing up, right? Like you get this group of people that you feel connected to, and you feel like you have like a uniform if you're in like, you know, a clique in high school or whatever, the like stereotypical experience, right? Yeah. And I didn't have that, and then I moved here, and you know, it turns out that like all of these people that I'm starting to have some kind of community with, lots of them have side cuts, lots of them have septum piercings, lots of them wear chokers. There's these like markers that you don't have to, you know, you're not shunned out of the community if you don't have a side cut. Yeah. But it's read as like this. It's the social marker that you can see someone across the train on BART and say, and you know, recognize a fellow queer because there's this like. There's this outfit, right? There's this way of presenting yourself that that makes you known. And like when you're in a room with a bunch of people like that, it's amazing because
it's awesome.
It's like you feel like you're part of a clique finally. And you know, you get I got something that I didn't get to have for my entire childhood.
Same. Yeah. Totally. Yeah.
Opposite.
I mean, it must just feel so just warm and safe to have a community that you know is going to love you in advance when you've never known that. You've never known that you could be safe and accepted.
Yeah.
Like we're default. From the South.
All of us.
All three of you?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
I'm from Florida.
They're both from Florida. I'm from Georgia. I actually got really lucky and wound up, you know, I came out as bi when I was like 12, and had like I was friends with like the one gay boy in my high school. We were the only people who were out. We were like the first people to bring like same gender dates to our prom, and so we like double dated in case we had to like switch dates because the principal didn't want us to be there, but then she also wasn't paying attention, and the lesbian math teacher just let us in.
Thank God for the lesbian math teacher.
The lesbian math teacher and the gay guy Spanish teacher were best friends, and it was beautiful. But I still had like I had an okay like friend community growing up, and you know, was like part of a punk scene that was like is also sort of a family, and then you know, I have like a kind of like activist community, and I came out in, you know, even though I was living in a town in Georgia that's like 100,000 people, I came out in a community. Well, for starters, when I came out as trans, at the same time, my boyfriend was coming out as trans.
Wait. Did you come out as bi and then you came out as trans?
Like a decade later.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
So I started out in a lesbian relationship and wound up in a gay male relationship. At least, yeah. From
did it feel the same?
It felt. I mean, it did kind of because it never like both of those were sort of loose descriptors.
Right.
You know,
right.
it is definitely a weird and, you know, very supportive, but also sometimes a little bit complicated experience to like come out as trans while you're in a relationship at all, and to come out with someone who is also going through a pretty similar thing. We wound up eventually breaking up over like whose turn it was to do the dishes, like being you know, for like we broke up for really mundane reasons and we're still friends. But yeah, so I actually wound up coming out in this community where not only was my partner trans, but like a number of our other friends were. You know, maybe like half a dozen to a dozen people at a time. And we were all really close. Like we would all, you know, several of us were roommates or in, you know, various relationships. And, you know, we would just hang out all the time and, you know, do a lot of stuff together. And so that really did sort of insulate me against, you know, that kind of like awkward, what am I doing now phase. It gave me people to like talk to. You know,
so important.
Yeah, it was really
what's
great.
amazing is that it's so important, and so many of us don't ever even have to think about it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, which is another wonderful aspect of what you all are exploring, is that you're making everybody else aware of what they have and aren't, and that that they don't even know that they should be grateful for. Right? I mean, it's just this constant evolving process of self-awareness. I'm so grateful.
Yeah, it's
Thank
cool.
you.
Like my best friend is a straight cis guy, and we've known each other since middle school. We've been friends for like 20-something years now. And we're a lot alike, like in personality and disposition, interests, hobbies. You know, like we have a ton in common, and, you know, I love him to death. We talk on, you know, we live thousands of miles apart now. We talk on the phone all the time. And it was sort of an interesting, you know, thing to sort of watch him go through a little bit of like, you know, like when I was coming out and changing my, you know, kind of like throwing my life into all of these changes. I think at some point, like, you know, instinctively he was like, cool, well, I'm there for you. Like whatever's going on, like I'm there for you, you know? And then like, but he has really like sort of learned a lot more about, you know, about gender and about sexuality and all that. And, you know, and has had sort of his own introspection to be like, am I straight? Okay, yeah, I am. But like, not just because that's what you're supposed to do, like, because, you know, he's straight because he's a man and he's really into women. And yeah, so it has been this, like, I am kind of interested in, you know, we talk about transness as being like this sort of like special thing that's off in a corner, but it's like, no, I think it's actually really good and really healthy for everyone to sort of think about like what gendered expectations have been put on you your whole life. What stereotypes do you live within?
Which I always wonder if you can ever actually escape them.
You can't, but you can at least think about like, what do
you...
Yeah, you can at least sort of stop and think about like, what if this is actually making me happy? And what things do I sort of wish I could do that, you know, I'm shy about or scared of or like never pursued because like that's not, you know, for me. And, you know, and like that's really cool. It's a really cool process to watch other people go through. It's been a really cool process to sort of put myself through.
And that mixes with the chemical hormone part in an interesting way, because there are things that are stereotypical about genders that end up translating in a funny way into hormones. So like
translating. Sorry, I'll be over here.
But so like
here all week, folks.
So before I transitioned, I just didn't really cry ever.
Yeah.
And coming out wasn't what helped with that. Getting my testosterone down and getting on estrogen like made me able to. So less like coming out.
Say that again. Wait, say that again.
Which part?
The getting on estrogen made you able to
cry.
Yeah, and starting testosterone made it much physically harder for me to cry.
Or like feel like not just crying, but like talking about like feelings and emotions, or you're just talking about
No,
crying?
I mean you can.
I'm talking about crying as like a physiological thing. Like
Oh,
I feel
okay.
Yeah,
like,
that's what I'm saying. That like there's this interesting combination of, so like the gender stereotype is that women are like weepy, right, and like weep at like a moment's notice over nothing and have like big feelings about. And I had these big feelings my whole life, but like actually crying over them, which is super cathartic, just didn't really happen.
Yeah.
And there is something physiological. I don't know this for a fact, but like having talked to a lot of trans people, there is something physiological about your hormone makeup that's like it is hard to like cause crying in yourself, even if you're feeling, even if you're feeling horrible, and like choked up, if your testosterone is really high.
That is fascinating. And but I'm curious about your experience of the emotions outside of the act of crying.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have a deeper experience of them?
Yeah, and that part I think more is having come out, and having done a lot of therapy along with coming out. Almost all of my therapy around that involved. So my therapist would. Okay, sorry. To take a step back, most of my therapy as I was coming out was couples therapy with a previous partner. And so a lot of those took the form of my partner talking about how they felt and talking about something that happened, and my therapist saying, turning to me and saying, "Bree, how do you feel about that?" And honest to God, like most of the time, my answer would be, "I don't know what that question means."
Yeah.
not even like I don't know how I feel, but I don't know what you want, what an answer to that question would look like.
Yeah.
And so a lot of therapy around that and around coming out was like actually learning how to listen to myself and how to actually explain like, this is how I feel right now to myself and other people.
Which is a process of deepening and maturing that I think that I hope all of us have an opportunity to go through, that I've certainly been going through my whole life, and just being more in touch with what's present for me, and then being able to name it and therefore understand it and therefore know myself.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah, and coming out was a big blocker to being able to describe those feelings. But this was all before hormone therapy. Was that coming out meant there was this like kind of weight lifted where it became easier for me to like start leading things back to that feeling, and being able to work forward from there. Right.
And it's like the emotional in touchedness is something that is like, that we think of as being like gendered and associate more with women, but it's like that's like a skill, and that's a thing that is that like we should all try to develop for our own good and for the good of the people who have to like deal with us in day-to-day life. Like when I talk about crying, it's like I am talking about that really as like a very physical thing, where it's like I can be the same amount of sad now and not cry. And sometimes that's good if it's like I'm at work and somebody said something mean to me, and but like sometimes it kind of sucks because it's like crying can be really cathartic, and part of
Hugely.
Yeah, and like part of like going through that, like like I also started hormone therapy about 10 years ago, and one of the things that was kind of hard was sort of realizing like I'm going to have to find other ways to process sadness and to sort of like get it out, because I can't just be like, oh, I'm really sad about this thing, I'm going to cry for like 15 minutes and then like I can go on with my day. Instead, it's like this, it can kind of linger with you longer if you can't kind of like purge out those negative emotions in the same way. And so it's like, well, maybe I need to learn to like go for like really intense walks, or like, or like listen to super sad music for a while, to sort of like get to that same point of like,
like deep, intense exercise,
right? Yeah,
kickboxing or something,
right? And
well, okay. I mean, what's so amazing about this is that it raises. You're talking about something that people have been wondering forever, which is, do women feel emotions more or have a deeper understanding of emotions?
Okay, so this has kind of been touched on by both of them already, and it was kind of what I wanted to talk about anyways. And it's like, there's physiological crying, and then there's social expectations.
Right.
And this gets back to socialized gender, right? And it's like, I was socialized KFAB, so like as a girl, and childhood girlness, a lot of which I had trouble fitting with because I'm queer. But there's a lot of, like, when you think of the stereotypes of like sleepovers or like gossip, there's a lot of emotional sharing. There's a lot of friendships that are based on like, this is how I'm feeling. No, this is how I'm feeling, and talking about your feelings. And my understanding is that a lot of socialized like male relationships are more talking about like an activity kind of a thing. And that's, being aware of that has also made it easier for me to befriend people sometimes who I used to have a hard time understanding and who would shut down when I would talk about my feelings. I think there are a lot of guys out there who are used to only talking to the very close women in their lives about feelings. And Jamie and I have talked about this at length, because whenever Jamie and I talk, it is at length. And about like how society works and how you have like men kind of don't talk about their feelings with the pals in their lives. And then like you start dating a girl and there's all this like emotional intimacy need that gets put onto this person. And like there's this catchphrase of like emotional labor. When it's like, when someone's like listening to how you're sad and your day was hard and stuff, like that's emotional labor. That's someone taking care of you emotionally. And they're in like stereotypically in female relationships, there are more like girls who do emotional sharing and do emotional labor for each other. And then they also go to their male partners and do their emotional labor. Right.
Yes.
And it's something that's really cool, because a lot of times when people who maybe aren't in the queer community hear all this stuff, they're like, well, what can I, like, I don't know, if you're wondering something you can do differently, like think for a minute, if you're a guy, think about if you have any close guy friends that you really talk to about how you're feeling, and maybe try that, like try that out. Like, I don't know, not talking about something like, oh, that sucks, but like, I feel scared right now. And I think that's something that, first of all, is hard on straight women because they're expected to shoulder this burden that they do, and it goes unappreciated, unaddressed. And secondly, I think it's really hard for men. Like, we all have feelings, and regardless of like your physiological responses to them, we all have feelings, and bottling up feelings is like kind of that toxic masculinity thing. And it's okay to be upset, right? Like, you're allowed to be upset, you're allowed to be scared, you're allowed to be shy. And there's so, like, when you see a little boy, right, you see a little boy with a t-shirt on him that's like, I'm tough, or like, let's fight, like all these like little boy shirts, and it's like, that gets really internalized, that's the only, you're only allowed to be tough and strong, and the people rely on you to be tough and strong, and like, that just sounds really isolating and not fun.
Today's episode is sponsored by Little Bird, the independent diamond and engagement ring experts. If you're getting married, the truth is that your engagement ring is likely to be one of the more expensive purchases that you ever make. And it's a tough one to make. How do you choose? Where do you go for reliable information about diamonds? Do you even want a diamond? And how do you keep from getting ripped off? Now, you can probably get up to speed on all of these issues by yourself because there is an immense amount of information on the internet. But that takes time, and time is valuable. And that's where Little Bird comes in. I vetted Danielle, the owner, myself, and I can tell you that not only is she good people, she really knows her stuff. Little Bird takes you through a process that helps you to find a ring that matches your personality and has lasting impact. They charge a flat fee for their services, and the odds are you're going to save more on the ring by working with them than they charge in the first place. So give Little Bird a call for a free consult. There's no harm, and you're going to learn a ton. And you can find their website at littlebirdtoldyou.com. And remember, the best way to buy an engagement ring is with a bird's eye view. I want to say in my personal life to the gentleman out there listening, boy, doing some emotional labor, great term, pays dividends. It pays such dividends with the women in our lives, with the men in our lives. Everybody wants to talk about their feelings.
With the non-binary people in our lives.
Thank you. Which is a great segue to something I wanted to point out. Doe, I misgendered you about 10 minutes ago.
You did.
Which you were all very polite to let it slide. I internally turned red right when I did it, and I'm sorry.
That's why you have the beard, because it hides.
It hides my blushing.
Yeah. I appreciate that. Thank you. I get misgendered a lot, and I often don't correct people because I know that I can come across as female, and depending on the situation that I'm in, it's just like it's not worth it. But I always appreciate when people note.
Well, you're so graceful about it, right? Which is the reason I wanted to. The other reason I wanted to bring it up, other than to just point out that I had done it for the purposes of self-awareness, is to look at the bigger cultural conversation around the exploration that we're doing on gender, which is what we were talking about earlier. When we first started talking about sexuality as opposed to gender, people started to think, oh, right, as you pointed out earlier, Jamie, oh, I guess I'm straight. I guess I'm heterosexual. What does that mean, right? It's kind of an initial foray into these kind of conversations. Then people started talking about gender, and now cis people are thinking, "Oh, I'm cis. I guess I'm cisgender. Is that okay?"
We'll allow it.
You'll allow it. And then when we encounter somebody who's trans, we want to be able. All of us in the world want to be able to talk in a respectful way about it. And the deeper we go into the exploration, the more layers we find that don't work. Do you know where I'm going with that?
Maybe.
Well, say what you were going to say.
I just want to say, like, a quick fast rule for anyone who's listening to this podcast is just as far as like treating trans people better than maybe you weren't aware like needed fixing, is like if you see someone and they introduce themselves to you, and pay attention to like their gender presentation and not like biological markers that you're used to looking for.
Yeah.
Like if someone says that their name is Chad, like they might be like a trans woman, but like maybe a guy. And if someone said so there's like name things, and then there's also like gender presentation as far as like clothing and stuff goes. Like that's a thing that happens a lot with like trans women, like getting misgendered, or like just trans people getting misgendered because people are looking for things like your height or like like biological things. I don't know. I feel a little awkward, so I'm gonna stop talking.
I think the hard and fast, like the only way to actually know how to gender someone correctly is to ask them. And I think that's almost always like if you can, and if you might get funny looks from some people, and some people might say like I'm a guy, obviously. But if you want to avoid misgendering people, you can go by presentation, but people have different pronoun preferences from how you might expect from how they look. And so the only real way to know that you are not misgendering someone is to say, hey, what are your pronouns? And then to use those.
Oh, that's so great. Okay, This is perfect, because this is, I couldn't quite figure out how to ask the question I was trying to ask before, which is, okay, so now we're in a phase where asking pronouns is a good thing to do. I can imagine, and I think I've heard somebody say that there's a future phase that we'll be in where it's rude to ask pronouns, like you should know. No, I'm still not asking this question well.
So there was sort of I think there was a think piece in like the New York Times about a professor who had decided to stop asking the question, and there's sort of stuff like there's things like that, but I can't imagine a future unless it is like the total gender neutral future where everyone uses they pronouns, where it wouldn't make sense, or like you're advertising your pronouns somehow explicitly.
Let me see if I can ask it in a different way. I think as we deepen our layers of awareness around gender, we find new levels, new ways in which we are, what's the word? Discriminatory or presumptuous.
Binarist.
Okay. Yeah, we find a new level at which we're binarist. And then we all have to shift our language again and our assumptions again. And then that allows us to go to a deeper level, which to people who've never been confronted with the question at all probably seems like an awful lot of work. And they may feel resentful about that, or they may not.
Or they may make light of it, which can really hurt.
Yeah, they probably do make light of it.
Yeah, you go around in a circle at a thing and someone's like, well, obviously I'm a guy, so you can use she pronouns for me. And like that's totally a thing that happens.
Don't be that guy.
Yeah,
don't do that.
My one piece of above all things, don't be that guy.
Well, I mean, and none of us want to, but sometimes don't know how not to. Right.
Yeah, I mean, there is like I feel like maybe what you're sort of getting at here is like there's some tension where like we usually most often remember to maybe ask somebody's pronouns if you feel like you don't have us, like if you were to guess, you might guess wrong. Like you meet someone and you're like, I feel like I'm not sure which pronouns this person might use based on their appearance or based on my, my read of them right now. And, I don't want to guess wrong, so maybe I'll ask. But we don't habitually do that to everybody, right? Like we don't do that to like every dude in a truck stop. People often don't, will ask Bree's pronouns, but not mine because they assume that I'm a cis guy and that they're like, and that they figure that they know, and they usually do guess correctly, so it doesn't wind up coming up, unless I sort of do the thing to jump in and be like, well, I use he pronouns just so long as you're all going around, which is I think a cool thing to normalize because, like Bree said, you kind of can't, like, if you just go ahead and ask, and if you normalize asking, then you can kind of always get the correct information, whereas like. And the more common it is to ask, the less you're sort of like singling someone out and being like, you there, what gender are you? But yeah, sometimes it does, like there are definitely, trans people, including sometimes myself, for whom it hurts. Or like that, like being asked your pronouns is like a reminder that someone has read you as trans, and that can be awkward. That can like raise a little bit of like discomfort where it's like, am I going to be less safe? Am I going to be less welcome here? If people have guessed that I'm trans. And sometimes it's like, and I definitely know people for whom it's like they really don't like being asked their pronouns because they're like. They're like, I'm wearing a suit, I'm wearing a tie, I've got a beard. Like, come on, like I've done everything I can here to make this as to give you all of the cues you could use to guess. Like, the only reason that you're still asking me is that for some other reason that I'm trans, like that we're at a transcentric event or whatever. And like I get that, and I get where people are coming from, but I think that it can also be even a little bit selfish, to be like, well, I don't want people to ask me because it makes me uncomfortable, so I don't want them asking in general because, like, I don't want to have to deal with the social interaction. For all of this as people out there listening, like, the one thing that I can tell you is it is also awkward for us. like a lot of people who are trans, like we also have friends who are trans, and so we have friends who come out and like, and like you do forget their new name for a minute, or you do like slip out with the wrong pronoun, or you like, like you missed their Facebook post and you didn't find out, that they
and you forget your own pronoun. I like misgendered myself a ton for the first like 6 months of me coming out because it's a new thing. You have to get used to it.
Right. And it's just like, so it's like we know it's awkward and we know it can be hard. Like the thing that I think is nice and is good is like when you see somebody like, like it's nice to know that you're trying, and it's sort of like after a certain amount of trying, it's like, okay, hopefully you've cleared the cache by now, and that it's like if you're still like consistently getting it wrong, that it's like maybe you could try harder. But maybe my mom could smoke less and she would remember.
Yeah,
take that back.
I was going to ask about that actually, but if your mom got it right.
My mom gets everyone's pronouns right except for mine.
Same.
Yeah. Because, like, she... Yeah, because like, and it is sort of a thing too, where it's like the longer you've known somebody, the more like deeply embedded they are in your mind.
Yeah.
And so there's this sort of like, awkward catch-22 where it's like, it's really, if you've met somebody once and they told you their name and then you meet them again and they're like, oh, actually, I changed it. Like, you don't have a lot of memory to clear out there. It's like, I barely even remember people's names at all, ever. So, like that old name is gone. Whereas if it's somebody that I've known for years, it does take a little bit longer to, really like internalize that. And you just got to practice.
It sounds, it sounds though like you're saying that that's a lot of the responsibility rests on the shoulders of the trans person.
In practice, it does, but like it would be nice to not. Like it would be nice. Like one of the things about the sort of emerging etiquette around that is to be like, where the sort of underlying guiding principle is to be like, this is awkward enough for us. Like it would be cool if other people could kind of take some of that awkwardness upon themselves, or some of that, or like eliminate some of that uncertainty and that risk by like being the one to, to kind of discreetly be like, hey, by the way, what's your pronouns? Or wait, I thought, did like, oh, I heard your friend use a name for you that I haven't known you to be going by. Like,
well, I gotta say,
should I use that? Should I use it all the time?
As a cis ally of the trans, I would want to shoulder as much burden as I could, but then I might be worried that by shouldering burden, I would be being offensive, like I was shouldering more burden than I needed to, or something.
Yeah, you sort of. So you try and you listen to criticism when you hear it, and so actually, so for example, I think the way that you apologized to Doe was really good, and like the about misgendering them, and that the incorrect thing to do is to make it about yourself, right? To
I'm trying so hard, and
or people will like fall all over themselves to apologize, and when you do that, what you're doing is saying like, this is really difficult for me, this the person who misgendered you, and you're making the trans person do emotional labor to like
be like, oh no, it's okay, I don't mind.
To be and really what you're fishing, when people say that, what they're fishing for is for the other person to say like, oh, it's okay, it's not that bad.
Yeah, you're an okay person.
Yeah.
Right.
It's like don't do that. Just be like, she, I mean they, sorry, and just keep going.
You say sorry, you move on.
Yeah, because it's like, we also don't want to dwell on this.
Right. Right. We don't want to call, no more spotlights, please.
Yeah, no one wants to keep having that conversation. Like, if you misgender somebody, it's cool to just be like, oh shit, I'm sorry, and like correct yourself, like, and just like go back to whatever you were doing.
Something that I think is important when people are like, why are pronouns such a big deal? Pronouns are a big deal, but I think the reason that it's the entry point is because when you're casually interacting with someone, that's really the only thing you need to know about someone's gender is how they want to be referred to. Yeah. Right? Maybe if we're hanging out or on a date, I can be like, well, I'm a gender fluid person, and so blah, 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 blah. But like, if we're just like having a business meeting or something, you just need to know how to refer to me in a way that's not going to be offensive.
Right.
And if that really trips you up, it's interesting for yourself to just like reflect on like, why is knowing people's genders so important to you?
Yes. Yes. I have always, on gender and sexuality, by the way, I have been for my lifetime floored by the fact that we are so insistent on defining ourselves and those around us by their parts and what they want to do with them.
They made a whole SNL skit series. They made a movie out of it, right? Like just a character, Pat, right? The character whose their entire existence was for other people to wonder what their junk looked like, and like what, right. And it was like.
And what they do with it.
The joke wasn't that. It was that it was so unknowable, right?
Right.
And it was the sort of implicit piece of the joke was that if you met someone like this, of course you would immediately want to know what their genitals look like and like basically stop at nothing to find out.
Just drive you mad.
Right.
And it's so nonsensical.
Don't you have better stuff to do?
Right. The part of me that's like really like politically like not up to snuff, like kind of wants to do a remake of Pat where Pat is a really attractive and charming person. Who's also really androgynous.
Have a crush on you or not?
Right. Like, and the people, because like the like. The sort of like transphobic part of that humor is that Pat is like sniveling and gross and unattractive, and there's like fat phobic. Like the part of that humor that like resonated with me as like a young person who didn't realize that I was trans is just that it like is driving everyone nuts, and then Pat will be like, right. Oh yeah, like my partner Chris, and then people are like, Chris
tells us nothing.
I have a photo of Chris, and that sort of like. that sort of like, oh, I have to know. And it's like, but I mean, and like part of that is that no one's ever like, hey, Pat, what's your pronouns?
Yeah, nowadays people would ask the pronoun.
Right.
hopefully.
And then like the joke is over, or the joke goes on that it's like, okay, I know Pat uses this pronoun, but like, are they trans or not?
Kate McKinnon, I just want to.
Yes, I'm aware of Kate McKinnon.
We are all aware of Kate McKinnon.
I guess not everybody would be. It's such a good movie. Kate's such a good actress.
She looks at you, She looks at the screen and she's looking at you. She's like licks the gun, looks at you. Like, stop.
It's so good. It's so good. And her work on SNL, amazing. And because I like watching videos of Kate McKinnon, YouTube popped one up today. Mm-hmm. And I was just amazed by the existence of this video. It was Kate McKinnon talks about her sexuality, which sounds innocuous in our culture. Everybody's talking about their sexuality, right? Mm-hmm. But and it had over 1 million views, and I almost clicked it, and then I just paused and I was like, why do I care so much about who and what and when and how Kate McKinnon is having sex? Like, why is it so important?
There's like, I am very concerned with Kate McKinnon.
Yeah. I was about to say, I wish I could say that I was like above that, and I'm like, no, I want to know how justified my crush on Kate McKinnon is.
Right, like how close this is. I think there's like 2
Intimate
points
knowledge.
here where it's like, on one hand, I totally agree with you, and then on the other hand, the queer community is a minority. And so when you find out that a celebrity you really like is queer, like you have this feeling of solidarity with them. And it's like, again, that feeling of like cliqueness is similar to like having people to look up to when you're younger.
Totally.
And it's like, oh my God, like someone I think is really cool is kind of like me. Like, and also the dating thing, but there's also, I think, that admiration stuff too.
We should probably take a step back and be like, all of these sort of like cultural markers and milestones are sort of like, like there is a cliquishness to it, and there's a little bit of like we're all white, we're sort of like middle class-ish backgrounds and all of that, and that like other people from other like other parts of the trans community have like totally different reference points, and sometimes we know each other and sometimes we don't. Yeah, I wasn't going anywhere with that. I was just like, we should probably be like, not everybody loves Kate McKinnon and Laura Jane Grace.
They're
All
very
three of
white.
us
We're
love Kate
very
McKinnon
white.
and Laura
When
Jane
I
Grace.
say we share an aesthetic, I mean punky trans women share an aesthetic with Laura Jane Grace.
Well, okay. You guys are so much fun to talk to. We've just blown way through our time limits. But, there's at least one question I want to try to end with, which is the use of the word trans itself is calling attention to something, right? And I wonder if we're headed for a time where it won't be about being a trans woman, it'll just be about being a woman, or is that actually a very useful?
So the experience of being trans in general, but for example, the experience of being a trans woman is qualitatively different from being a cis woman, right? There, in particular, there's like, if you are living in a binary society, which like for the foreseeable future we are, then being trans involves something that does not necessarily happen with cis women, which is a moment of understanding that the way that you were assigned at birth is not you.
Yeah.
And so it's definitely useful insofar as like there's a completely different experience being had, and it affects almost everything about your life, that you have to deal with this, and then you have to deal with just being a woman in public, right? And there are also things specific to being a trans woman in public, right? There's most cis women do not have to deal with catcalling and have to deal with street harassment. They do not have to deal with catcalling and street harassment of people calling them tranny. They don't have to worry, if they go on a date with a cis dude, that he might find out about their birth assignment and murder them for it. Right?
Which happens every year. Like that still happens all the time. Like that's not like a ghost story. That's a real thing that happens right now.
California is actually the only state where that is illegal as a murder defense.
And so they're
Whoa. That hold on. Say that again.
California is the only state so far to have a law or standing judicial precedent that the like trans panic defense is not a valid defense for murder.
Is not a valid defense.
Right. That if
In
you
other states, it is.
Right.
And
But
it,
if you
has,
find
it
out
has
that-
been used recently.
What is it considered if it's not murder?
Well, it's not that it's not murder. It's that it is specifically in California not a justifiable defense. It's like explicated in the law, right? That if you murder a trans woman, you cannot go to court and say, I found out that she was trans and I was so angry that I killed her.
Right.
Which
Anywhere else
suggests-
in the country, it is a usable defense in court.
Right.
For like sentence reduction and things like that.
Yeah, like a mitigating circumstance or
Believable.
yeah. And I mean, it like sometimes men are convicted, if they're arrested, sometimes men are convicted for that, sometimes they're not. A lot of the time they'll use the defense and it will turn out that they actually did already know and they had an ongoing relationship with this woman, and what actually happened was that they freaked out when someone else found that they had a sexual relationship with a trans woman, and and then in order to look tough, or because they blamed their partner, that they assault or murder this woman to either hide it or to sort of like compensate, and it's not uncommon for people to still get away with that.
So,
Yeah. So
point being
that these threats of the shit that we have to deal with is a superset of the shit that cis women deal with frequently. That there is catcalling and street harassment and violence for cis and trans women, but that we navigate it in different ways because of our birth assignment and how we look and all of these things, and also that we just like experience a different class of things as well, and so that's important to like pay attention to and to understand.
yeah.
And I want to tie back to your question when you're like, well, does that mean in the future like the term won't matter? And I think it's not about whether or not the term matters is not about the trans community. It's about our society as a whole.
Yeah,
and
definitely.
if we could live in a society where people didn't have so much anger and violence and fear and ignorance around trans issues, and then it could be like, maybe it's still a binary society, but like a less strict one. And then you raise a kid and you're like raising the kid one gender and the kid's like, I don't like this gender. And you're like, okay, sweetie, let's go shopping. And it's fine. And people on a larger scale are fine. Like sometimes like the problem with those scenarios, right, is like a straight guy gets attracted to a woman and then is like terrified because he doesn't like see her gender as valid.
Right.
But like that's just straight. If you're a straight guy and you like trans women, you're still just straight. Like like that's such a thing. But sorry, so what the larger ideological point I was going to make is that like the idea isn't to like erase like whether or not people are trans, and like wouldn't it be better if that just like wasn't acknowledged. It's like to have the weight of that lifted a little bit, and for it to be like, until a couple weeks ago I would have said something like, I'm a Jewish person, and in this day and age, just casually saying like I'm a Jewish person doesn't have weight in like America for most people, I think, right? Like you can just be like, yeah, and like these are my identities, and people are like, oh, that's cool. Whereas like trans is still an identity where there's a lot of people where you run the risk of being like, I'm trans, and they freak out, right? Whether it's super negatively like that or just dismissive or mean or whatever. And so it's not about like, you see, it's cool the way hearing like the way that you're looking at things and wondering like what the future will look like. And I don't think the future is about pretending that there aren't trans people or like not acknowledging the transness of that. I think it's just being able to look at it without all the negative emotions a lot of people have around it.
Well, is there anything else I should have asked about that I didn't, since we've already gone so long?
Cats. There are 2 cats.
yes.
They are precious.
Sorry, I had to.
Bree's cat had an
Everything.
existential crisis when I moved in with my cat because he'd never seen another cat before, and he was just like, what the hell is that?
What is that?
Yeah, and then like eventually he calmed down, and now they're friends, and it's really cute. That's the end of the cat story.
I'm sure there's a metaphor in there somewhere.
Right.
Yeah. You know.
They learned it from us.
Yeah.
Well, thank you all so much for being here. I appreciate your coming all the way from the other side of the bay. It means a lot coming across that border. I do appreciate it.
Thank you.
Cool. Well, thank you. This
Thanks.
has been really delightful.
Yeah, it's cool.
Well, that's it for our interview with Jamie, Bree, and Doe, folks. Thanks for listening. If you'd like to hear more from these three, we're posting another portion of the interview, the section where we talk about polyamory, on our Patreon page, and you can find that at patreon.com/together. Also, please be sure to check out our sponsors for today's episode, Little Bird, the independent diamond and engagement ring experts. The best way to buy an engagement ring is with a bird's eye view. You can find them at littlebirdtoldyou.com. And they really are a super great group of people, so if you're in the market for a ring, it's definitely worth a call. If you like what you heard on our show today, please subscribe to us on iTunes. It makes a huge difference to our ratings when you do that, and we really appreciate it. If you have any questions or comments, or if you'd like to be on the show, please reach out via one of our social platforms. You can find our website at www.together.guide. Our Facebook page is facebook.com/togethershow. Twitter and Instagram are both at together_show, or you can email me at host@together.guide. That's it for today, folks. See you next week.